Hey everyone, this is Innovator's Mindset with Marc Isseks. There you go, buddy. There you go, man. Marc from New York, Long Island. All right. Marc and I have just been having a great conversation talking about, we were just talking sports and I got it out before anyone had listened to it on an education podcast because I know everyone hates that. But Marc is actually an assistant principal in Sewanaka. Is that right?
Yep,
Sewanaka, am I saying that
Sawanica.
right?
Hmm.
Okay, so you say it way better than me. So, in the Long Island area, I have a very special place in my heart for Long Island as an Islanders fan, but I know a lot of schools and districts out that way. And he also has a book called Captivate: Engaging and Empowering Students in a World of Digital Distractions. Which is there distractions still? Is that a thing?
I think it's over now. It was just a blip. Yeah.
Totally. There's none of that anymore. So we're going to talk a little bit about the book. But Marc, if you can just tell everyone a little bit about who you are, what you do today, and how you got there, I think it's a really great place to start.
Yeah, of course. First, let me thank you so much for having me on. I mean, it's such an honor to be chatting with you. I'm a big fan of yours for a very
Thanks,
long
man.
time. Yeah, I'm a third generation educator. My parents were educators. My grandparents were educators. Be honest, everybody who walked into my house for the first 20 years of my life was an educator. There was, I think, one lawyer. Everybody else was worked in a school. So, of course, as a teenager in my rebellious phase, I said I'm going to do anything on this earth but go into education. And my parents kind of just nodded and then, waited a little bit for me to get that out of my system. And I'm glad that I didn't follow that original instinct. So this is my 31st year in the system. I started as a teacher in Brooklyn, New York, and worked my way up to a chairperson, a content coordinator, a curriculum coordinator, and then a building administrator for the last about 15 years. Love professional development, love working with teachers. The worst part of being an admin, in my opinion, and I know that you were an admin as well, is getting out of the classroom. If I could have a magic wand or find a genie with a lamp, I would ask for my one wish to have all
Yeah.
building admins still stay in the classroom because it's just critical. So I always try to get into classrooms whenever I can. If a teacher is out, I'm going in, and any opportunity. I like to demo lessons for the teachers that I'm working with, and I like to stay rooted in the classroom because that's where all the fun is.
Well, it's funny that you say that because like your family has a background in education, and my family has a background in hospitality in the restaurant business. And I feel like even though I was in education, I never left that business because I was, probably similar to you in classrooms all the time, welcoming people, that thing. Because I think there is a great correlation between that. You and I actually just connected. We were at Learning the Brain together in FETC. And I'm curious because we were having a conversation about this that sometimes you can see some presentations at FETC that would not go over at Learning the Brain and vice versa. And I think that really, if you want to make some push in where education can go, you should be able to actually say the same things at both conferences and push people that maybe are very comfortable with technology, some people that aren't interested in as much, and really honor that, but like staying true to your principles. So tell me like about what did you present on at Learning the Brain? I'm like curious about that.
Sure. I had the good fortune of presenting two different talks. The first one was on student engagement, which is really a passion of mine, kind of the centerpiece of the book that I just wrote.
Yeah.
And the second was about leveraging artificial intelligence while still preserving actual intelligence, because I feel like that's kind of at the crux of where we are at this given moment in education. We're at this inflection point. So I've been doing a lot of thinking around that, and trying to make heads or tails of I mean, we've
Right.
both been in education in the same era, and we've seen everything change from like no computers in the classroom to everybody has a handheld device.
Yeah.
But at the speed with which AI is shifting the conversation and potentially shifting and impacting instruction is like lightning speed. Like
Yeah.
every 3 months, you have to reevaluate and learn something new.
Well, so it was interesting because I love that you talked about that because one of the things I talked about at Learning the Brain was that if you are not cognizant of how kids are using AI, they will become dumber, as we all are, and that is something.
Right.
And there's some places I'm okay with being a little bit dumber, and one of them is Google Maps because it wasn't like I was really like I wasn't into cartography prior. And, as someone who travels to work, I don't know how I'd get around stopping at a gas station and grabbing a map. I think I'd really struggle with that. Other than that, there's a lot of there's a lot of outsourcing our thinking to that. And my argument's always been like, you And I think this is like the big argument, especially at learning the brain, is like you have to be involved with students and how they use AI, because the experience and wisdom that you have
Right.
has to transfer, because it's not kids are getting better at technology. The technology is so much better that we will become dumber if we don't use it. So like, what did you, I'm like curious about some of your takes on that, some of the things that you maybe shared, maybe a strategy or two that you shared in your session about that. Cause I know this is a big conversation space, because if you're like banning AI, you're not really prepping kids for the world. But if you're,
Right.
going over the top on it, you're actually also not prepping kids for the world where they have to think, where everything that they can do can be outsourced. So why would I ever have them work for me if I can just get AI to do it the same way?
What you're describing is exactly the conversation that's most critical to be having today. By the way, just to go back to your Google Maps example, one of the most consistent arguments that I would have with my wife was when we were traveling, and I would say, "Should I take this road or this road?" And here comes like we're at the point, and she wouldn't answer, and then I make a choice, and then we'd of course hit traffic, and she'd say, "I you should have taken the other one." And I was like, "Well, that's really great that you had that insight. Now, why couldn't you share that a few minutes ago?"
Right.
So that conversation and that argument and that bickering, which is immature on my end, has gone by the wayside with Waze and Google Maps,
Yep.
because now I just follow the blue line, and people ask me how I got to their house or how I got to the event or whatever it is, and I say I just I don't know what road I took. I followed the blue line, and I'm kind of cool with that. I used to not be, because I used to take a lot of pride in knowing where I was going in Brooklyn, but I've given up that ghost for sure. To answer your question, though, one of the things that I shared with the audience at my talk is I kind of went back to the philosophy of and psychology of Lev Vygotsky, which is about like the more knowledgeable other in the zone of proximal development.
Yep.
And what I shared with them, I said, we all know that there's what the student's capable of doing without us, and then with a more knowledgeable other, or the MKO, they're capable. The circle expands. You've probably seen this diagram, and then of course there's a zone where, even with the help of a teacher, the student's not going to be able to achieve something, and that's fine. I said, but now with AI, not only do we have a more knowledgeable other, but we arguably have an all knowledgeable other. So we can actually have the MKO and the AKO working together to expand the zone of proximal development. And that helps our kids go beyond where their previous limitations were. So that was one of the things that I shared with them. And I truly believe that if we're leveraging AI properly, those are some of the incredible benefits that it will bring us in the classroom.
Yeah, like even with the technology thing, and I'm a huge advocate for meaningful use in the sense that I benefited from it tremendously, right? Like I do a job that I didn't know existed because I started posting online one day. I would actually say a lot of my friends are shocked at how much stuff I know all of a sudden. They never thought like, hey, you're like a pretty bright guy. Like I was, kind of the
It took them by surprise on that.
right. And it was blogging has been one of the best things, and that constant reflection. And I know you could say, well, why don't you just write? The difference between blogging and like writing in a journal is everyone can read my blog. And so you have to be more thoughtful about it, because I'm trying to like, okay, what's the argument going to be against this? And so it actually, I know this sounds weird. If you use it the right way, you can become more empathetic through the process, because you're trying to understand people's positions. So when you use it in a way like that, I think it can improve intelligence, as you said, when you work together with it. I will say it's kind of funny, because my wife and I never had those arguments because I have no spatial awareness, but she'd have the argument with Google Maps. I'm like, do you think you know more than satellites? Like, do you actually think you get this right? And when we lived back in Canada,
Does she? Does she?
in Canada, maybe. Like that's it.
Okay.
She lived there. She grew up there where we used to live. Here, there's no more arguments, because like we don't know. It's like kind of funny because we're like still like I don't know how we get there. The only place I can go without Google Maps is the Magic game. Like I know that route and everything else, but if it's like traffic, I'm like, that was it. It was my one route. So, all right. So I'm going to ask you about your book, Captivate: Engaging and Empowering Students in a World of Digital Distractions. So tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about like the synopsis of this, what you're trying to achieve, and obviously it's kind of in the subtitle, but I'd love to hear your take on it, and what would readers benefit from reading this?
Sure. Well, my goal in writing the book was to kind of bring people into my brain a little bit and share not only the things that I've read and learned over my 30 plus years, but also my lived experience as an educator for 30 plus years. And the area that I've really emphasized and developed, or I should say, dedicated a lot of my time is in and around student engagement. And so, how do we break through to increase student engagement? Because we know that kids are distracted, and I know some schools are using like pouches and things like that to try to take phones out of students' hands. But my argument is that the changes in the brain have already occurred.
Mhm.
So, we used to live in a world where you could stand in front of a room and say, "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please?"
Mhm.
And people would get quiet and then they would listen. But now, people will give you their attention, but you have to come and take it.
Mhm.
That's the nature of social media, and that's why when you look at TikTok, they tell you that a user has, a content creator has 3 seconds to capture a user's attention. Otherwise, they're scrolling away, and when they scroll away, they're never coming back. So now we have compulsory education law. So our kids are there in body, but not necessarily in mind. So this book was written to try to push educators' thinking, and the first level of this is to understand where there's cognitive entrenchment in your own practice. One of the most common phrases in school buildings that I've known is that's the way we've always done it.
Right.
And that's the rationale to continue to do the things the same way. But we have to first address like where our own shortcomings and limitations are in terms of where we're thinking and what we're thinking and the practices that we're using and have been using, and see if they're still as effective as they once were. And if they are, great, let's double down. And if they're not, then we have to think of ways to move forward. And that's where the rest of the book comes in, which is basically trying to share with educators different ways to motivate, engage, produce more creative students, and to create a more innovative school.
Okay, we didn't talk about this, so I'm gonna put you on the spot here.
Go for it.
And I know you're in New York State, and I'm curious. So you're familiar with the Portrait of a Graduate? The New York,
Yes,
like they're pushing it hard, right?
a lot.
Right. One of actually is like interesting because I pulled it up because I was like, this is you actually be the perfect person to talk about this because one of the things you said is like, hey, we want creative people that innovate, and one of the key attributes is a creative innovator is literally out of New York State. So how do you see because and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, I don't like that it's called Portrait of a Graduate. It should be Portrait of a Learner. And the reason I believe that is because you should embody the same things, right? Like if like, hey, we want
Right.
kids to do this, do we actually see ourselves in this process? So how do you see kind of the intersection of your book and some of the things you're talking about? And again, if you don't know what I'm talking, if you have no clue what I'm talking about, because I did put you on the spot, so we'll cut this out if
Oh,
you
I
want.
know, I
So,
know, I know exactly what
so,
you're talking
so
about.
tell me like the connection between your book and some of the stuff that they're focusing on a profile of a graduate, for lack of a better term, they should have used learner.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I definitely agree with you on that. I think what I like about Portrait of a Graduate is that it sets a North Star. It
Yep.
basically says, here's where we want to go. But we've always had that. The Portrait of a Graduate is just a fancier mission statement that used to be on the wall that nobody saw, and now we put it on a big banner so everybody sees it, but the ideas are still there. At the end of the day, it all comes down to leadership and execution. So you can have a wonderful portrait and you can have all these different ideals to which you aspire, but how does it take root? And who is leading that and doing that work? And how do we know that it's actually making its way into the instruction? Because at the end of the day, instruction is the most critical piece in a building. And you could speak to this as well as I can. When instruction is great and engaging, student misbehavior is almost non-existent. People are happier, people are more joyful at
Right.
work, the whole experience is elevated. But conversely, when the instruction perhaps isn't where we would like it to be, then all these other things start to creep in. So the Portrait of a Graduate, what it gets right is that it kind of gives us that shared North Star. But again, where I think where it doesn't go far enough is in the how do we do it. Why the question why is always very important, but after you get past why, then you have to get to how. And the analogy I always use is like if it's 5 seconds left in a basketball game, the coach calls timeout and the team huddles around, he might or she might spend time saying like, we really want to win because winning's super important and we
Right.
work so hard. It's like, okay, yeah, that's great, but like, what play are we running
Right.
in the next 5 seconds to
Right.
win the game? And I feel like that at the end of the day is the most critical question to be answered. And that's the work that I've really enjoyed
Okay.
being a part of and continue doing.
Yeah, I think that's so. One of the things I've been really pushing back on with this profile of a learner, because this is all over the country, it's all over Canada as well, and I don't think it's a bad thing. But as you said, like for some of the groups, it's like a PR statement. It's like this is what we want our students to do, but it's like, well, yeah, but like, so you're just saying this, but you're also having like an old school curriculum that doesn't actually push toward these things. So it's actually like, hey, we're going to measure on this on state tests, all this other stuff, which actually measures none of these things, but this is what we want you to turn out. And it's like, well, actually, like we need to talk about both of those things. So I think that's a really great point that you make. The last question that I'm going to ask you, and I really appreciate this because this is part of my career. you still are an administrator in a school. You get to see great teaching every single day. You also do work with schools, and you have that blessing. I don't know how you're pulling that off, right? But it's lucky because I think a lot of superintendents, and maybe I shouldn't be saying this out loud, but a lot of superintendents, we're like, no, you can't like do that. And I actually think it's beneficial because you probably take your own time to do that, and then you go see great things, and then you get to bring them back to the school. But how is that really benefiting like your current practice, obviously, to some of the work that you're speaking with communities and doing keynotes and doing sessions? Like, how is that benefiting you? Maybe in both ways, right? Like, how does that benefit you? Speaking, how does it benefit you back in school as an assistant principal?
Yeah, I'm a very reflective person, and I'm a work in progress. I feel like there is no mountaintop. I believe there's a mythology and the concept of a master teacher. I think that when you talk to people who are considered master teachers, they'll all tell you the same thing, that they're still learning and they're
Right.
still exploring. And every time they get to another level, more doors become available that they couldn't even see
Yeah.
were even things at some point. So those are the folks that I love the most. And I feel like I'm after 31 years learning more now than I've ever learned before. And that kind of goes to your question. Being able to leverage what I know and be able to share that and try to help and empower other people and inspire them gives me tremendous joy, but it also gives me an opportunity to interact with them, learn from them, and then reform and refine my practice when I go back. And then it becomes this iterative cycle, which has only made me, in my opinion, a more impactful educator, a more impactful educational instructional leader. So I wouldn't trade that for anything because it's just allowed me to magnify my learning almost like on an exponential level.
Right. I really, honestly, and I'm so grateful that a school community, encourages you to do that. And I wish more schools do that because I just think it benefits, right? Because you get to see, and then, like when I first got on social media, people were saying like, oh, it's like an echo chamber. I'm like, an echo chamber is not the worst thing because I'm getting shouted down in my own school district with some things, right? And it's like, am I off here? And then you start realizing, oh, actually other places are doing this and they're maybe not doing it this way, but they're tweaking it this way and you learn from them
Right.
too. And I think that's really powerful. So, I hope people that are listening to this, Marc has some really brilliant ideas. You should check out his book. It is in the link down below, and connect with him. You'll see his socials as well. But Marc, thanks so much because I know you're super busy. So I really appreciate your time. So thank you so much for taking the time to chat and share your ideas with my audience and everyone. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a wonderful day.